Welcome to Go Home Heat, a hard to kill podcast. That is right. We are not here. It's just me, guys. I was hoping waited a little bit longer to watch this pay-per-view, hoping that Jared could be here, but he has a little bit of an issue there. He could not be here, so I watched this thing, and I'm going to try to bring you a clean, concise, thought-provoking analysis of Impact Wrestling's Hard to Kill pay-per-view from Saturday night. I've always been a big fan. I have watched TNA since its beginning. I'm old like that. And I have always been a huge fan of their intros. They used to have the deep-voiced guy that would tell you the things. And he does well at this stuff, but they've got a new guy now. And I thought they did a great job of giving this entire event a big fight feel. This is a huge night in Impact World, as we are going to have the AEW World Champion, as all of you who would be listening to this know. Kenny Omega changed the wrestling world when he showed up on Impact with Don Callis, and now they have been going back and forth between AEW and Impact Pro Wrestling, and this is nuts for an old guy to see, because I mean, you know what? Stryker talks about it during the main event, so we'll get there and talk about that then. It starts out with Tennille Dashwood and Caleb Kay versus the team of Decay, which is a reuniting of Rosemary and Crazy Steve. To be more familiar with some of these programs, you could watch our last, we entitled them Rastling podcast, where we talk about Impact and AEW specifically. So if you're not familiar with some of these storylines, you can just go back one or two episodes and get caught right up and jump in here. But I'm going to try to talk about, in the interest of time, talk about what's happening here on this show. D'Lo and Matt Stryker on commentary. They have replaced the former commentary team of Josh Matthews and his lovely wife Madison Rayne, who at one time were the commentary. Not that long ago, the commentary was Josh and Don Callis. Now here we get Tennille, Caleb Kay. This is a legitimate intergender match. You don't, when you tag out, the woman doesn't. If the man tags the woman, then the guy doesn't have to get out of the ring. That it is okay for people who are men and women to wrestle each other in the way this match is set up. Crazy Steve starts out here. He starts out hot. Rosemary comes in with the quick tags. Crazy Steve is a much better wrestler than you would think by the name and the gimmick, and he has been showcasing himself in the episodes coming up to this. Stryker mentions that you can't make the mistake of judging a man without knowing what he can bring to your world. Stryker is on fire the whole night with these interesting quotes, and the way he, like, also in this match, he says the human form is beautiful regardless of gender. He's just he's really good at showcasing things and bringing literary comments along with some actual old school wrestling. He brings up the Luthazes and the Cactus Jacks, or even further back than Luthaz, and he mentions he's just very good at observing something and saying things that lend themselves to the viewer who may be interested in more than just fisticuffs. Now we have D'Lo Brown on commentary too, which we said, and he kind of gets into a groove as we go further along in this. Caleb winds up with the super kick on Rosemary in the chin, which again emphasizing that this is legit intergender wrestling. Caleb and Rosemary are tied up on the outside of the rope, and then you have, basically what happens here is you have two different green mist spots. Crazy Steve hits a green mist, the old Japanese wrestling Great Muta style mist shot into the face of both Tennille. Steve hits Tennille with one. Rosemary hits Caleb with one. Caleb walks into the DDT for a finish, and Decay goes over. And Stryker does something I don't see a whole lot in the world. They promote, Stryker and D'Lo promote a DVD. Yes, folks, DVDs do still exist, and they are still sold here at Impact Wrestling. Match 2, VBB. which is Violence by Design. VBD. Eric Young, Doring, and Diener are wrestling against Rhino, Tommy Dreamer, and Cousin Jake. Starts out with a brawl. The commentary team must have got the note that they had to push Doring as a killer. They describe him as the heater, an old school term for the guy who's the huge monster beat up other people wrestler in pro wrestling. He winds up pinned up in the ring with three guys that have chairs and doesn't give way to any of them as the furniture gets broken up early. This is a Tommy Dreamer Rhino match, so obviously it will be old school rules or basically no rules because these are two original ECW wrestlers. As stated before, no rules, so eventually we get the furniture broken out along with the kendo sticks. Doring absorbs multiple kendo sticks to the ribs before he wraps his arm around a rib shot, and just that doesn't bother him at all, and he goes into Rhino for some shots. We wind up, of course, Dreamer breaks out the thumbtacks, and this gets a little crazy as EY gets backdropped onto said tacks. Rhino gores Doring almost through an area where tacks are. Dreamer gets the DDT on Rhino. Jake drops Dreamer. EY winds up being with tacks in his back. Pile drives Jake for the 1-2-3, and the evil tag team is here to rid the business of all of its infections. Quick backstage segment where Sabin and Rich Swann are discussing what's going to happen in the fight, and Moose comes into their locker room. They want to know what's going on. Rich goes a little crazy in that he's pissed because if Moose had not hurt Willie Mack, then he would have replaced Alex Shelley, and then they would have had a tag team that was more conducive to one another. Moose said, "Look, man, you're gonna need to put that behind you. I'm on your team now. We're a team. When I played football, I went out there with guys I hated. Didn't matter. Once we kicked off, I'd die for my brothers on the football field, and that's how it's gonna be tonight out there. You don't have to worry about me. We can deal with each other later." And I thought that was well done, and it really heightened who Moose is as a character. Almost a gun for hire-ish type guy instead of I'm just mean, which I think is important for his character going forward. Look, guys, I'm just going to talk glowingly about Moose all the time because I freaking love the guy, and this was a huge night for him. It stinks that Shelley couldn't wrestle, but a huge night from Moose, who I think is just totally the future of the biz if handled correctly and booked correctly and all of that. We get Fire and Flava, Tierra Hogan and Tasha Steelz versus Havoc and Nevaeh. This match is going to be for the TNA Knockouts, Impact Wrestling Knockouts Championship. And the story here is it's really hard to buy that two people, they're probably giving 300 pounds to the tag team they're wrestling. Tasha Steelz, Fire and Flava are probably giving that much to them. And so it's kind of hard to fathom how the bigger tag team could possibly lose. But if you write that into the storyline and you realize that the difference between Nevaeh and Havoc is a lot in weight, then you can kind of tell the tale that as long as Havoc is in the ring, we really don't have a chance. So what we have to eventually do is get Nevaeh in the ring by herself. And if we can do that, we can win this match. So they absorb a tremendous amount of punishment. Havoc, sometimes when she wrestles, can look a little bit slower, but then again, I mean, she is basically the same size. I mean, it feels like when you're watching her, she's the same size as Abyss. And people like that probably should wrestle a little more plotting. But tonight, she was plotting, but she did look like she was feeling good. And she put on a heck of a performance. There was a spot where both the young ladies, for Tasha and Kiera, tried cross bodies on her as she was standing from the top rope. And she caught one of them, kind of stumbled and turned into the other one crossboding, caught the other one, and then did a fall away slam. And that was just, I personally never, Cena may have done that, and I forgot, but I haven't seen that done much, and that was amazing. And of course, eventually, that move Matt Striker called a vulgar display of power. And if you give me a Pantera callback in the middle of my match, I'm gonna pop. And of course, I did right there. Havoc does eventually get pushed out of the ring to a point where she can't really help. They do isolate Nevaeh, and they get the double team kicks, stunner, swinging neck breaker, finish on top on her, suplex combo. 1, 2, 3. Your first knockout champs since the remaking of this title are the young, athletic, and personality out just off the chain tag team of Kiera Hogan and Tasha Steelz, Fire and Flavor, and Madison Rayne, who we spoke about earlier, who is a legend in their division, and Gail Kim, who is probably the female wrestling legend of this company, come out and anoint them with their new title belts, and good for them. As Decay winds up backstage, Decay being Rosemary and Crazy Steve go to Taya Valkyrie and say, hey, we'll help you in your match tonight. And Taya says, hey, I think I can do this on my own. And they say, of course you can do it on your own. But Barrazo ain't going to be out there on her own. To which Taya says, touche. Not really. I said touche. Taya says, we're going to win. Okay, come out there, help me out. And once we win, we're going to go to Slamtown because you need to see Slamtown. Slamtown, my friends, is the home of one John Morrison, who is currently your Monday Night Delight. At one time, he was the Friday Night Delight, Johnny Mundo. He is the significant other of one Taya Valkyrie, and they are really in a close race with a couple of other couples as being the best wrestling couple in the world. It's a close race, though. There's some good wrestling couples. Cedric Alexander and Big Swole, Seth Rollins, Becky, Andrade, Charlotte. There's some good wrestling couples in the world. All right, let's get back to this pay-per-view. Ace Austin charges the ring to announce that he will be put into the X Division title match because he deserves it. This pay-per-view event is too big of a deal for Ace Austin not to be in it. All of this may be true, but Scott D'Amore says nope. But I do have a match for you. And this is the surprise moment of the evening where Matt Cardona is announced. Matt Cardona, if you do not know that name, is Zack Ryder. Matt Cardona is his real name, I believe. Zack Ryder would be his WWE name. One thing Stryker does here, and this is a it was going to be a quick squash match, kind of, sort of, but what they wound up doing is Ace gets in trouble, and his henchman, Madman Fulton, comes running out. They put a whooping down on Matt. Matt clears the ring real quick after he gets back to his feet. They run away like heels will do. But the neater thing about this whole thing was how Matt Stryker constantly explains to you who these different performers are in the history of pro wrestling. Like, he tells you Doring was a Triple Crown champ. To be honest with you, I don't know where he was a Triple Crown champ. I would love to see where that is. Also, he says, he wrestled all over Japan. D'Lo points out that he had wrestled him multiple times in Japan. Here, he points out that Matt Cardona is a guy who, if you know your off-air junk with this wrestling thing, it's a big deal that WWE shut down the Twitch feeds and the way people make money in WWE outside of the company. They want them to keep their things inside of the company, and if you do get a podcast, it should be on their network, that kind of thing. They want to control the people who are in their product. Now, a big deal is that AEW, of course, doesn't do that. They pub these things and allow guys to make money outside of their company. And all of this kind of goes back to guys like Zack Ryder, who figured out a way to make money on the Twitches and with podcasts and with T-shirts and utilizing ways to create alternate revenue streams. And he's one of the blueprints of this style that has really become the way a lot of these indie wrestlers make their living. Isn't about, and it's great because there's a limit to what an indie wrestling company can pay you. And so you have to figure out a way to make an alternate revenue stream to be able to make a living at this. So him doing that at the WWE level put that on a grand stage and allowed other people to observe and begin to create their own alternate revenue streams. That, I can't remember exactly when the Young Bucks got on that same train, and when those are two of the guys that I really think of as genesis of that movement, which is now really hugely important to our being able to enjoy it, because people can stay in the business and make a living. And maybe that goes all the way back to the Rock and Roll Express and how they marketed themselves post being in big wrestling companies, because the Rock and Roll Express, as you all know, it's much older and amazing. They're still performing crazy. All right, so after that, we do get the X Division title match, and the X Division has a timeless history of bangers, and this is one of them, buddy. This match is fantastic. Rohit Raju versus TJP, who is dressed as Manic, and as you probably know, the Manic character is what TJP dressed up as in order to wrestle, because he had lost a match that said he could never wrestle again for that title. So now he's the champion of the X Division, dressed up in a mask as Manic. Chris Bay is also in this match. Chris Bay is the future of this division, maybe the future of this company if he stays in this company long enough. It's a blur match. They're moving quickly. Rohit hits a pay dirt on Bay with the Tilt-A-Whirl head scissors on the other guy. TJP, it's so crazy. I can't really describe everything. He does wind up doing a modified Texas Cloverleaf, turns that into a different leg hold, and then winds up wrestling Rohit while still holding Chris Bay in a hold, and somehow manages to make it all look like it makes sense. Rohit manages to pull out of that. After pulling out of that, he winds up eventually getting the mask off of Manic. But Manic's face is painted, so holy cow, is it really TJP just because he has the exact same tattoos as TJP and his face looks just like TJP? Because there's white paint on his face, and then his eyes are like blacked out and he looks kind of like a skeleton. So that's not what TJP really looks like, because he never looks like a skeleton, right? Because he doesn't have paint on his face. So anyway, this is really confusing. But we go back to the match. We wind up with Chris Bay hitting a fantastic cutter off of the what he calls the Mamba Splash, what TJP calls the Mamba Splash. Again, Manic using every move that TJP. And a neat thing that they did during this whole thing is D'Lo and Stryker argue about whether or not it's Manic, and Stryker gets to the point where he's calling Manic TJP Manic. Just give him the whole name here. We do have a cool spot where Rohit goes for a cover on Manic, and Manic kicks out and cover, and when he kicks out, his momentum rolls him over onto Bay, who's beside him, and there's like a double kick out there, which was neat. Manic also manages to hit a Thumbelina crucifix bomb, and if you've never seen such a thing, I hadn't either. It was amazing. The Mamba Splash winds up leading to Rohit with the drive-by knee, and we almost get the win there, but it's not. Rohit winds up turning that into a regal stretch. Again, Rikert's killing it with knowing all the name moves and all that, which of course he should, but he is using every move has been owned by a different wrestler at some point, right? And so he is doing a good job of like mixing up some of those calls and giving you like the crossface is the regal stretch, that kind of thing. Rohit gets on another roll on Chris Bay, which makes Bay basically useless once Manic rolls in and catches him and gets him into 1-2-3 roll up for the win. So Manic maintains the title. Rohit is furious, and Chris Bay is the one who ought to be furious, because if I was as good a wrestler as Chris Bay and I didn't have a belt yet, I'd be flustered too. I know he's a young cat. I know he hadn't been in the company all that long, but I saw him in the crossover event New Japan had. He was fantastic in the matches he had there. He doesn't do bad matches. He does spectacular. Every time he goes out there, he's a star. He looks like a star. He talks like a star. He acts like a star. He wrestles like a star. So we're going to need to move on to him soon. They got to. It's just better for the show. Okay. Although having him in the main event is neat too. And Raju rightfully needs to move out of the main event after having been the champion. So this all does make sense. Alicia Edwards and Eddie Edwards are backstage, and Eddie basically tells her she's got to go home because he's fixing to have to wrestle in barbed wire. Yes, I said that correctly. He will be wrestling in barbed wire. And she, who is claiming to help out because Shamrock is the sidekick of one Sami Callihan, Eddie correctly points out, if you are to help me wrestle, what are you going to do with Ken Shamrock, the world's dangerous man, regardless of being there? And so she says she won't come out and help, so we know that we're getting a one-on-one match more than likely. Deonna Purrazzo versus Taya Valkyrie. This is one that I was so fired up about because I love both these people as wrestlers, and it doesn't wind up being the type of match I thought I would get. However, I will admit, storyline-wise, and just the way Stryker and D'Lo were able to tell us the story of how the match is being worked, it really heightens who Deonna Purrazzo is as a pro wrestler. I'll tell you about that in a second. We start out with Kimberly and Susan, who is Su Yung, who is also Susie. Now she's dressed kind of up like a librarian type, but we get that corrected pretty soon as to what her personality disorder and dysfunction actually is, or dysfunction, if you'd like to say it. Rosemary and Crazy Steve on the other side. So we have a multiple personality disorder on one side, and we have Rosemary, who legitimately answers to the demons that surround her and help her from her satanic father, along with Crazy Steve, who I'm guessing is along for the ride because he's a little crazy. And before we get started good, all these people wind up fighting that aren't in the match. And Stryker correctly points out that this is a cluster. He can't figure it out. And all he wants to do is watch the wrestling because he has two of the best wrestlers in the world, female wrestlers in the world, that aren't getting to showcase what they can do because these other people are interfering and they really are brawling. The referee gets involved. He says, hey, you guys all got to go. Susan has her phone out and she's filming the whole thing, and then she's telling the referee, you can't do this to us, blah, blah, blah. D'Lo correctly points out that Susan is not really a librarian, she's a Karen. And if you don't know what a Karen is, check that out. And it's pretty clever that they slid a Karen into this whole thing, especially if they can go so far with that in a wrestling scenario, and that's so far removed from the other two personalities. This is going to be fun, but they all have to leave, and we wind up getting a match. Once the focus returns to the ring, we get Deonna Purrazzo in her virtuoso best stylings. She picks out a body part. She decides to work the left arm. They call it joint manipulation. He gives you a little clever when I was in college thing about, that wasn't joint manipulation when I was in college. They talk about the critical control points of the body and the way the joints matter in those scenarios. Then they talk about how if you watch Deonna Purrazzo work, she is going to work a body part in an old school manner, and they emphasize her professionalism. And she does. She cranks that arm and she cranks that arm, and she puts it in different holds. They emphasize how she's constantly thinking when she's in the ring. They emphasize how she has a rhythmic breathing, and they give a close-up of her, and you can tell the way that she's been. It's neat the way Stryker presents it, because what he's basically saying is her controlled breathing is controlling her heart rate, which controls her ability to stay focused and effective no matter how long the match goes. And it also allows her to keep that thought process focusing on one thing only, which is how I hurt different body parts and how I counter whatever you do to me and put it into another move on that left arm that I focused on. Now, after she does that, she slides that arm bar without letting go of it into a leg. She gets Taya into a leg hole as well, and then she winds up with Taya pinned up like a pretzel with both her leg and her arm in bars, and then she gradually transitions into working the left knee along with the left arm. And then she begins to isolate that knee Taya is doing a great job here of, for one thing, being flexible enough to be put in all these things. And second of all, she's selling how badly she's hurting. We get the gotch callback by the announcer. Taya finally gets in some offense, but as she's getting in offense, you got to remember, not only is her left arm injured now, her left leg's injured. Then Deanna quickly, as she needs to flip the momentum, because even though Taya is limping around and hitting her, she's being effective. She kicks the other knee, and then she puts the other knee in a hold. So next thing you know, Taya is basically working with one good limb, and it's not a squash match, but it is a systematic destruction of the greatest female wrestler this company's had over the last 2 to 3 years. And that's the story you want to tell if you're promoting Deanna Purrazzo as the best women's wrestler in the world, which they are rightfully doing right now. And as like all of our guys have said, that some of the best women's matches of the year last year in WWE is stacked with women's wrestlers. And we're all big fans of Thunder Rosa, and we're all big fans of Serena Deeds over here. And we do think that AEW is getting better. But Deanna Purrazzo had some of the matches that we believe, especially the Jordani Grace match, weren't just top 10 women's matches. That was one of the top matches of the year last year. And she's not giving us that style of performance exactly, but she is effectively telling a wonderful story in the ring of how she is a technician in destroying this person, similar to what a Bret Hart would do to you without the fisticuffs. Taya is too good to be held down for too long. She winds up getting a little bit of offense in here. She gets a leg lock. She transitions that into the STF, leaving out the U because it's not John Cena's move this time around. She's limping on both legs once they break out of the hole, because Deanna's close enough to the ropes that she can get her legs over to it and break the hold. Deanna winds up hitting a float over Fujiwara armbar, and then that gets rolled. The armbar by Purrazzo gets rolled into a crucifix by Taya, which gets rolled into a double armbar reversal back from the Virtuoso. And now you have Taya. She's had her legs taken away from her. She's had one of her arms taken away from her. Now both of her arms are pinned behind her, and there's no way for her to get to a rope. There's no way for her to move. There's nothing she can do as her shoulder blades and shoulders are getting pulled together. She has to admit that she has lost. A win like this over someone as big a deal as Taya is huge for Purrazzo. The choice of having her go over in this manner tells you how all on board they are with Purrazzo, and how they are probably right, because it just worked. I loved this match. It wasn't the one I predicted. I could probably watch one that I would like in some ways better between the same two people, and they may tell that story on a different day. This was the right story on the right day on the right pay-per-view, because what they did was they allowed people who they hope they have a crossover audience with AEW, due to the fact that the champion of AEW is on this card. Then what they did was they underlined, we have great women's wrestling, and our women's champion is phenomenal. And I thought they did a beautiful job of that here. Cut backstage, AC Romero has, okay, if you don't watch the show, you're not going to know what I'm talking about here. Johnny Bravo was shot and almost killed on the TV show during a wedding with the demonic Rosemary. He was going to marry her, and they're trying to figure out who the murderer was. They wound up putting AC Romero's tag team partner in jail for the murder. AC is trying to prove his innocence. He sneaks into the women's dressing room, which would probably get you in big trouble, but hey, he's got a Sherlock Holmes style hat on his head, so therefore it makes a whole lot of sense that it's okay. He steals the Ring Rust cologne. Ring Rust cologne. If you're out there and you like to smell good, Google Ring Rust cologne. I don't know if it really exists. But Bravo, Johnny Bravo, who was the one who smelled the cologne, and that's how we know who shot him, finds it interesting. Whose bag is it in? They don't tell you whose bag it's in, because they're going to tell you that on Wednesday Night Show. Up next, Karate Man versus Ethan Page. This is a cinematic match where Ethan Page's alternate personality fights him, and they go complete green screen here. Every single time someone makes a move, it's only a couple of minutes, and it's hilarious. Every time somebody makes a move, they go from the beach to Mount Rushmore to what looks like maybe a paddy field in China where someone is swinging a sword, to also what may be some form of temple in China, and a lake. Then, of course, when Ethan Page believes he has won, he has not won, and Karate Man gets him into some form of bicycle kick, and it's not like a bicycle kick, it's more Karate Man is floating on the air and kicking Ethan in the face as if he is riding a bicycle horizontally. It's an amazing performance here we have from these guys. Eventually they fight onto a lake of fire, which turns into a scenario in which Karate Man literally rips Ethan Page's heart out and walks the stairwell of the Chinese fortress after stating, "I guess you weren't so hard to kill." Guys, it's freaking money, dude. Freaking money. Okay, Moose runs into Callis in the hallway. Don Callis, the invisible hand who has managed to get all of these things done. He's got the AEW World Champion here on his show with his Impact Wrestling. He said, "I just want to thank you, Moose. I know I got you under contract here for 2 years. I see you being in the future. When we're talking about this match, we didn't really know that you were going to be in this match. I want to kind of appeal to your logical businessman side and let you know, you're under contract and you make a lot of money. And if you were to hurt the AEW champion, I don't know if we could continue to pay you the amount of money we're paying you now. I don't know how that works with your contract if we have financial issues." And Moose lets him know that if you know anything about me, I've never fought anybody. I've never been in a football game. I've never done anything I didn't try to win at. And once I'm done winning tonight, I'm going to win the Impact title belt. And then I may show up on Dynamite one night and whoop your kid's butt. And it's funny because Callis is older than Omega, and he kind of has talked about Kenny Omega as if he's his son. So it was kind of cool to kind of throw that your kid's butt. Moose, again, this is a huge night for Moose. And we kind of have made him the centerpiece. Interesting, right? The Impact Champ isn't the centerpiece of these conversations. The Impact Champ is yelling at Moose. Moose explains why it's okay he's here. The invisible hand that runs wrestling from behind the scenes doesn't go accidentally find Swan or Sabin. He goes and accidentally finds Moose, because Moose is the guy who can change it here. So we're emphasizing who the future of this company actually is, and it ain't Rich Swann. Rich Swann's the president of the company, and he's a fantastic pro wrestler. But it's kind of neat the way they're doing this for us. Then we get the barbed wire mayhem match, and we don't wind up getting a Kenny. I'll just get this out of the way. We don't see Alicia or Ken Shamrock really in this thing. What we do see is a ring where one side has a chain link fence with barbed wire running through it, and chain link above the top. We have a chain that runs across one other thing with different forms of barbed wire weapons hanging on them: a bat, a kendo stick wrapped in barbed wire, a bat wrapped in barbed wire, just basically a noose in barbed wire. Then a thing that looks like a rope in barbed wire. They have a video game thing in wrapped in barbed wire. It's crazy. And they have little plywood areas that are wrapped in barbed wire leaning on each post. They get in there and they fight, and this thing is brutal, and this is not really my style of thing. I'm not really a deathmatch guy. But Strikeheart does discuss a little bit the history of the death match and why it's important, and he does talk about how there's a reason why when you have a rivalry that's been going on for multiple years and these two guys can't get each other out of their system, they do wind up having to at some point take this to a level that ends the feud. And he does that after Sammy has backdropped, actually, doggone it, Eddie winds up doing a suicida into one of those plywoods wrapped in barbed wire, which was crazy. And then Callahan puts more barbed wire on top of him and then does a Cactus Jack style cactus elbow, one of the many incarnations of the probably most famous style of wrestler in these things would either be Mick Foley, Cactus Jack, Dude Love, Mankind, or his former tag team partner, Chainsaw Charlie, better known as Terry Funk. And this stopped short of being too hard to watch. A lot of these things can be. There's one spot there about pretty early on. He wraps that. I called it a noose. It could also be called a halo. It's just a round circle of barbed wire that's pretty thick. He wraps that thing around Sammy's head and starts pulling back on it. And I was like, oh boy, this is going to be tough. But they keep going and they keep doing the spots. Eddie thunderbombs Sammy onto a chair, and I thought for sure that the chair was completely wrapped in barbed wire. I thought for sure that was it. It wasn't. They keep going. Sammy is a tough guy. Oh my gosh. Stryker comes over with this one right here. When we ate from the tree of knowledge, we decided right from wrong, and the world went to hell in a handbasket. Also, when Doring was in the ring earlier, I forgot this one. When Doring was in the ring earlier and they surrounded him with steel chairs, he made a callback to Gulliver's Travels, which I know most of you guys listening to this are probably lit majors, so you'll really get that reference. If not, get your Google on. And okay, so then there's another cool spot in here, and there is storytelling going on. The interesting thing is a lot of times you'll hear, especially old heads like me, tell, well, it's not really storytelling. The story to be told here is the story of this whole feud, which has been Sami Callihan is an evil, calculating man, and Eddie Edwards is a man who gets mad and rushes into danger. And the match is told like that. Sami calculates how to hurt Eddie. Eddie's the better wrestler, but also can't help himself from getting angry and rushing into scenarios where he winds up hurting himself or getting hurt. Like he does the suicida and accident and hits himself on the wood. He runs into the fence, wrapped in barbed wire, all on his own, trying to hit Sami, who moves. That's part of the story. Another part of the story winds up being Sami grabs a kendo stick wrapped in barbed wire. Eddie grabs a baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire. If you know anything about these two characters, Eddie rolls with a kendo stick all the time. Sami rolls with a baseball bat. Eddie looks at Sami and he offers him the baseball bat, and Sami gives him back the kendo stick. Because as bad as Eddie is, I said bad, I meant mad. As mad as Eddie is, he's still operating with some form of a code. You use your weapon, I'll use mine. Even though obviously a baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire is more dangerous than a kendo stick wrapped in barbed wire. So then they go to using those. Eventually we wind up getting Eddie's advantage, and he hits the running knee, which he calls the Boston Tea Party, as Sami was attempting to, I guess he was attempting to get up. In theory, he would be attempting to get up holding the chair, but what really happens is he's holding a chair still in front of his face for Eddie to plant a knee into. Then we bomb onto the said chair after the knee shot, the Masawa finish, who Eddie has evidently trained with or did train with back in the day. And according to, I believe that's what Stryker said, so don't hold that against me if I'm wrong. This match is over. Eddie wins clean. He wins the rivalry. He wins the feud. Sami isn't hurt by it. Other than the fact that he's got barbed wire holes all over his body along with Eddie. And we move on to our main event of the evening. And at this point, you have had a fantastic pay-per-view. They've given us a little bit of everything. And now we're getting a six-man tag that is a bit of history, where you have a world champion for an American company wrestling on another American company's show. Kenny Omega and his good brothers Bullet Club, old school Bullet Club mates, will be wrestling Chris Sabin, who is an old-time TNA tag team wrestler who also did a lot of time in New Japan. You have Rich Swann, who is the current champion of Impact Wrestling. And you have the current TNA champ, which is a championship that Moose anointed himself wrestling on the other side of the aisle. Stryker mentions how if you're old enough, you my age, for example, they didn't have podcasts really, and you couldn't watch everything on TV like you can now. You only got 3, 5, and 10, or 3 networks at the house. So you read about wrestling, right? And back then you would buy a wrestling magazine, and you'd have, a guy bleeding on the cover, and in that wrestling magazine it would rank all the champions in one row, and then you would have the rankings of Continental Championship Wrestling wrestlers and NWA guys and your Texas wrestling guys and your WWE wrestling guys, and you would do these fantasy bookings in your head of, well, what would happen if Hulk Hogan wrestled Ric Flair, and then eventually, of course, Flair goes up there. But this is the kind of thing that wouldn't have happened. You wouldn't have these guys wrestling in different companies against each other back then. Maybe you'd have it, but it'd have a wonk finish. Not so much, though. And then, of course, once WWE took over the kind of landscape, all of that changed, and you just wouldn't get this kind of thing on television. And so when they say this was history in the making, you can't understate, you can't overstate the importance of what we're getting here. And you also can't really overstate the importance of how the finish goes in this match. Because if the AEW champ ain't losing, guys. Bottom line, he ain't losing no matter what. But if he goes over clean, it's a big deal, because the assumption would be Moose is in this match. He'll cost Rich Swann the match at some point. That's how you get out of having to book it to where your champion loses clean to their champion. Callis gives an amazing call out intro for Kenny by God Omega. And then we get the match as these guys start to square off. You do have a tag team involved that is actually the Impact Tag Team Champions are the Good Brothers, Ken Anderson, Doc Gallows. They work together and things go their way a little bit. Don Callis is running his mouth on the side, and Stryker with another great call. What becomes of the useful idiot when he isn't useful anymore? And then he says, that wasn't rhetorical. And wants D'Lo to answer, to which he will not. Now, the Kenny Swan matchups are interesting, and we get them a little bit at a time. We get the early on test of strength with Moose and Gallows, and the great thing about the Moose Gallows test of strength here is it heightens how huge Moose is. And Gallows is a big man, and maybe a little bigger than Moose, but he ain't fluid like Moose. And so by heightening the size of Moose here, when Moose gets into the moments later on in the match, where there's a moment in this match where he takes on the entire Bullet Club, or the entire 3 guys he's wrestling here. He winds up hitting, a drop kick on one guy, a hezzy kick on another guy. He turns, and Kenny Omega's sitting on the top rope, and he leaps, kicks his feet they had to be 8 feet in the air, because Kenny's on top of the top rope, sitting down, probably 7 feet in the air, and he leaps and manages to kick at 6'6", leaps and manages to kick Kenny upside the head, comes down on the ground, gets up, rolls over, spinning lariats. It's crazy how physically gifted this guy is, and they do constantly allow the story of the match to be how incredibly talented Moose is, in spite of the fact that, of course, everybody's getting their stuff in. Everybody's doing great. Swan is he winds up hitting a couple of his style finishers on Kenny. He gets the step over hezzy kick to the head on Kenny once, and then he does actually hit his finish off the top rope finish on him, and it doesn't get the 3 count. And then it all breaks down. Well, let me say this first. Over the course of telling the stories of this match, Matt Stryker goes into business for himself a little bit. I can't imagine they told him it was okay to say this, but he mentions Kota Ibushi, the New Japan Pro Wrestling World Champ, and says everybody knows the relationship between Kenny Omega and Kota Ibushi, and I just think it would be great if we had a world champion tournament in which, and he doesn't spell it out, but that would mean you would have the Impact champ, the AEW champ, I guess the Ring of Honor champ, and the New Japan champ in a tournament against each other. And he said, it'd be great if it was on Impact TV. Well, I can promise you that ain't happening. But, wow, if it would, Coda's the doggone man right now. Okay, so we go back to this match, and we wind up having, again, it's a fantastic matchup. We highlight Moose as the future of this company. And we have the Impact champion, Rich Swann, although it was a great performance, Kenny hits the knee on Moose that knocks him out of the ring. He had already hit a knee on Rich. He hits another knee on Rich, gets him into One Wing Angel. Nobody kicks out of the One Wing Angel. 1, 2, 3. Clean, middle of the ring. The Impact champion loses to the AEW champion. And I thought this pay-per-view was a fantastic show in general. I really thought Impact did a great job of highlighting their roster and highlighting the diversity of their product in contrast to other products. And they didn't hide that through this whole thing. They haven't hidden the fact that they do campy, hopefully funny things, that they are willing to go places with the death style matches that, other than the one Moxley Omega match before, and well, I shouldn't say that. There have been 3 or 4 matches in AEW that have gone. The Cody Brody dog collar match was pretty rough. So I shouldn't say that part. But they did emphasize the differences in the way the companies work. And really happy for Impact Wrestling to have a showing like that. And I think it is a matter of time before we get Moose going over Rich for that title, moving on. And I don't know, probably by the time that happens, I'm guessing Kenny will have moved on and gotten back into just wrestling in his company. I can't see this lasting forever. But if they ever go back to Moose and Kenny Omega, man, take all my money. Now, this has been me, KP, trying to walk you through a little bit of that, and hopefully you are prepared for Wednesday night, Happy Dusty Day, Wednesday night, and Tuesday night, Impact Day, of next week. Also, I want to thank the Ginn Project and Charles Gibson over there, and Daniel, who helps him do some work over there with the photography. Go check out their shop, their online shop. You can purchase things there. You can purchase some of our goods there if you would like, the Go Home Heat production stuff. We got posters, baby. Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate you hanging out. And this has been a copyright 2021 of Go Home Heat. Go home.